Sometimes in the context of romantic relationships, you keep falling upon the same type of toxic individual, and after a few you think it is over and the next one is finally going to be different, and in the end, unfortunately, you fall into the same toxic situation again. And in this video, I wanted to elaborate on why does it happen, when it happens, either to you or maybe people close to you that you know of, and how to resolve that once and for all. One hint that is a no-brainer, everyone can understand that. If you fall into the same romantic patterns again and again all the time, despite being a smart individual, that means there is a link with your parents initially. At least in most cases, it is linked with the behaviors your parents had with each other, or maybe some behaviors you have noticed in the adults close to you when you were a child, and somehow you have modeled their way of communicating, their way of behaving, and their way of attracting some people who were a perfect match to their behavior. To that extent, we can mention the Karpaman Triangle that is quite well known in family therapy and relationship counseling, where you notice that whenever we have some wounds, some fears, we tend to take one of those roles as human beings, also because those roles help maintaining connections when things are going wrong, when things are going bad. However, if those roles are maintained for too long, they may get extremely toxic. So we have the rescuer or the savior, which is the category most people fall into, especially when they are into coaching and stuff like that. Quite often it is because at some point in your life you have had this role, so you constantly try to save people, to help others, and maybe in your relationship you tend to attract, therefore, the person who plays the victim. And that victim will always need you somehow, and it is giving you some comfort to know there is somebody you can save, somebody you can help, somebody who needs you. That way you know you can maintain the bond. If that is happening to you, or if it happened to you in the past, reflect upon the relationship your parents had, maybe it is linked, or if you had good parents but your first ever relationship was heavily toxic, maybe it fell into that role. Then, therefore, we have the victim, the person who feels like they can't do anything by themselves, it is literally impossible. They keep, as they say, attracting random bad events in their life, but nothing is ever their fault. It is always the fault of people, the fault of the government, the fault of the weather, the fault of the, I don't know, of energetic mysticism or whatever is happening. It is never their fault. And they need other people to help them because by themselves they are nothing, they are not enough. And then we have the persecutor, which at the extreme case becomes the manipulator, the narcissist, the person who needs others to bend to his or her will so that that person can get elevated, can be reassured about their power over others. And the persecutor will constantly be on the lookout for a victim because the persecutor can't live without somebody who admires them, somebody that they can control. And by controlling, we don't necessarily mean anything physically threatening. Usually a manipulator will first come with compliments, with nice, polite behaviors and be quite charming with you. And as soon as you give that person some credit, or that you start needing that person, same thing, you may get into the victim position where you feel they enhance in your head the thought that you can't be complete without them. That is where the toxic relationship starts happening. So those roles are things we fall into. Basically, if I really oversimplify, those are the things you fall into when you don't feel well. I am simplifying, but that is basically the point. Whenever something tough happens in your life, you are tempted to fall into one of those positions because it is what, from a behavioral instinct, helps us maintaining human relationships. Even if we are in a bad state, in a bad phase of life, all of them have positive intentions. Even the manipulator can be pretty useful if you put him in a position of power where nobody wants to listen to anything. A guy like that or a woman like that at the top at least is more likely to maintain order. Still toxic in the long run, but at least in a short while that person may also be useful in a wider system. So all of those roles can have positive benefits, at least on a short period of time, but the point is to get out of it as soon as possible. And they can be changed. Somebody who was the savior, so somebody who was trying to help people around, when that person notices that you don't take care of the people she or he wanted to take care of, then that savior, that rescuer, will become the persecutor with you, for example. So all of those things can be changed, can alter themselves. The point is to realize, figure out, whenever you are stuck in a relationship you don't like, what type of role among those three do you regularly or the most often fall into? Then once we get into the healing part of it, it is going to be trickier unless you have already worked on yourself. It is to identify in your life, in your opinion, just like that, thinking about it right now, who do you think was the first person you had this role or behavior with? Was it therefore one of your parents eventually? Was it one of your siblings? Was it one of your schoolmates, one of your teachers in school? Who was the first person with whom you have been a rescuer, a victim, or a persecutor? Usually people who are persecutors don't really work on themselves. They presuppose they never have to change. It is other people who need to change, not them. But let's be positive here, and let's say that even manipulators will reflect on themselves somehow, someday. In any case, who was the first person you had this role with? And even as just a first hint, the relationship you had with that first person, is that relationship right now in your ongoing life going well? Is that relationship completely solved, healed, over, or is it still kind of wounded and you're still trying to solve something that is not completely cleared out in your life? That alone might be the reason why you keep attracting other people who match the behavior of the person you were trying to save, or the person you have been a victim with, because that person made you feel inferior compared to themselves. Whatever happened with the first person you have felt or experienced that with, is it completely over by now, and are you sure it is completely over? Then the next step is to realize or accept or tolerate the possibility that all of those roles on the triangle are absolutely all coming from a fear somehow. A fear, usually a fear of loss. Fear of being abandoned, a fear of losing somebody, fear of not being taken care of, fear of not being listened to, fear of retaliation also. Sometimes you play the victim because you're scared that if you were to say out loud what you think, you would destroy everyone around because you would get too violent. So instead of that, you repress everything and become the victim so that you just remain a tiny little piece of something and you don't bother anyone. Many fears may be at the cause of any of those roles. The point is to identify, in your opinion, if you have some idea of this right now, what do you think could be the fear that would make you fit into that role again? A fear of losing something, a fear of losing somebody, a fear that propels you to protect something eventually. What kind of fear could be at the beginning, at the origin of that behavior on your part? And finally, the last step, which may be the most difficult of them all, if you are not used to some kind of trance state or some kind of meditative processes, the last phase is to look at the image of that relationship that is problematic for you right now. Whether the first person you have experienced that with, or somebody right now with whom you are stuck into some narcissistic bind or whatever happens, that person with whom you have a problem right now, you just get an image of that person or an image of the last time you were in conflict with that person. Then, in some kind of meditative process, you pause for a moment, you listen carefully, and you look at what is behind that image. If you could remove in the blink of an eye that image of the first thing you thought about, then what is behind that? Something deeper, something more profound, or something that you may have not thought about so far. Then you keep going, you remove that image and look at what is behind that, as if it was the layers of an onion. you keep removing layers after layers until you kind of loop in circles because it is always stumbling upon the same thing. And that main thing at the end, that might be something very, very uncomfortable, something that might get you vulnerable, something that might get you sad, angry, upset, guilty, ashamed, any of those deep feelings. When you get at the core of something so deep, then yes, then you know you are really at the core of what has been maintaining that type of relationship in your life so far. Then, ultimately, and if it is something way too painful in yourself, then I would definitely recommend going to see a therapist to work on that specifically. And in the meantime, whenever you stumble upon somebody who tend to trigger in you that instinct of either being the rescuer or being the persecutor or being the victim, whenever you meet somebody who tends to trigger that in yourself, the idea is to build some distance from the initial automatic responses you get into when they first say the type of things that so far tended to trigger those behaviors from you. So if you keep playing the rescuer, the savior, and you don't even notice anymore why do you do that, you just do it spontaneously, there is necessarily one type of phrase or one type of situation that triggers that more often this in yourself. Once you have identified this situation or the type of phrase or the type of topic of conversation that tends to trigger that in yourself, then the next time it happens, you can simply pause for a moment, remember what you saw by removing all the images one by one and getting at the core of the deep, vulnerable thing that you were trying to protect. Get back to this feeling or memory and notice that this thing that was hidden inside you, that is the real goal. If you had a fear of being abandoned, a fear of being left alone, okay, you know your real intention right now is to not be left alone. Then you can simply respond according to that. Is my response right now the most appropriate one to not be left alone? And sometimes the answer will be no. If I try to save or help that person, I'm gonna get fucked up because that person is just playing the victim and I need to let that person deal with their shit by themselves. On the other side, if you're tempted to become aggressive with somebody, get in the position of the persecutor, and you have identified that deep down you were scared of being ashamed because at some point you have been ashamed for not being enough, and now you try to be aggressive with people to show that you are enough, then same thing, reflect on yourself. If what I want deep down is to feel like I am enough, is my response or the response I am going to give right now, is it the best response in order to feel that I am enough? Yes or no? Quite often it won't be the best answer. Trying to become aggressive with somebody to prove them wrong, that is not going to lead to you feeling like you are enough. That is just going to leave you even angrier than you were when the conversation started. So it is always linked with one specific trigger in yourself based on your life story. Once you have identified this, you can add up this strategy in your mental thought pattern whenever you are about to get triggered by some person who is fitting the role you are used to play with or used to get trapped with. Then pause, calm down and consider the response I am tempted right now intuitively to give to that person. Is it the most appropriate response for me at this moment? And then within the context of romantic relationships, if you want to enhance the possibility of creating a healthy, legitimate connection, you have down below the 5 type of language patterns I have used the most often during a conversation with a girl I liked and that I had noticed we had a good fit together without my old bullshit roles that I no longer use because I know it was toxic back then. Then I can say those things to enhance the possibility of a real true connection between me and her. Those 5 best language patterns and strategies are contained down below in the description box if you want to check it out, and I hope this will be helpful. I know those topics are not really easy to talk about or to reflect upon. I hope everything will go well for you and see you soon in the next video.